Issue 23 of Transformers brings us right up to the precipice of the end of Daniel Warren Johnson's run, and this issue is all about squaring up Optimus Prime and Megatron for their first real showdown in the Energon universe. And yes, we have seen a brief battle aboard the Ark in the Energon Universe 2024 special, but this is going to be the confrontation between the two leaders that will carry much more weight, because one, it won't be a flashback, and two, there's a sense of it being a climactic moment due to Johnson wrapping up his tenure on the book with issue 24. As with other issues in this fourth volume of the series, there's a sense of the familiar permeating issue 23. While the stakes are much higher, there's nonetheless some déjà vu at play here as we find ourselves back in a similar setup to issue 6, which, sure, technically began in Transformers 22, but you get the idea. Something that I like about these nods and references to previous issues is that they often carry something more substantial beyond a simple homage. They usually shed new light on something that we've already seen or play into the story in a slightly different way. So ultimately, I think it results in feeling like we've come full circle. And you know me and my crackpot theories, where I see the themes of cycles and patterns underpinning everything in this comic, which I fully admit may not be the creator's intentions, it's probably just my own interpretation, but the ideas of trying to escape a cycle only to find yourself right back in it, as well as trying to be even just a little bit better when you find yourself back in a familiar pattern, seem to apply here. So what do I mean by all this with the setup calling back to previous issues but slightly changing it? Well, in issue 22, Spike was about to literally follow in his father's footsteps, entering the Matrix to, I assume, purge the infection and supercharge Optimus, just like we saw in issue 6. But Optimus interrupts this structural cycle by stopping Spike from sacrificing himself. And this is the culmination of Optimus Prime's growth throughout this comic, from stepping on the deer, to saving Spike from his gunshot wound, to using the Matrix to power up the hospital, destroying Shockwave's energy harvester in issue 12. The list goes on. All of these events show us Optimus growing into the role of Earth's guardian. And it all comes to a head when Optimus stops Spike from sacrificing himself. He won't allow another human to meet that fate, even though it may have resulted in a quick fix to the entire situation just like it did previously. He's just unwilling to pay that price again. And with that pattern interrupted, it left a question hanging for issue 23. What now? A new solution was needed to this now familiar problem of Optimus Prime being on death's door at the worst possible time, which I'm starting to get the feeling that this happens to the big guy a lot. But let's just dig into this sequence a little bit. The atmosphere of despair and, even though we know it's not, just the sense that this could be it for our heroes, or maybe the sense that they have that it could be it for them, it's well conveyed by Jorge Corona's somber art in this section. Just look at the number of Autobot faces that are obscured by shadow here. Very moody. There's a lot here that's evocative of issue 6, Optimus Prime on a makeshift deathbed, the Autobots gathered around. Even these booming sound effects, signifying the Decepticons closing in on the planetarium, is reminiscent of similar sound effects being used in issue 6 as Devastator was attempting to punch his way into the Ark. The recurring sound effect works here much like it did in issue 6 by creating a foreboding sense that the end is nigh. But this panel in particular is very sharp with the Bakum effect, hand-drawn in such a way that this series is now well known for, complete with squiggly motion lines to convey impact and looking absolutely phenomenal set against this yellow background with a killer gradient from purple to pink to an orangish color. What really brings the whole thing home in this image for me, though, is the little bits of debris seen falling as the Autobots huddle around Optimus. The sense of doom and despair is just palpable on their faces. This panel is also a nice shock of loud color in a sequence that is by and large quite muted, and despite the loud booming sound effect, very somber and hushed. The similar moment in issue 6 felt like it moved at a brisk pace, but here it feels like things are just a little bit more spaced out. These almost dreary brown colors are used throughout the interior of the planetarium, giving the sense that the characters are in a dimly lit, battle-torn space. as well as setting the tone for how grim things are. In a comic known for its bright and loud colors, this segment stands out for how muted and grim the colors are, and thus how it affects the tone of the scene. Truly, it's the darkest hour for the Autobots and the people present, and all those gathered here seem like they know that their time is up, and they want to use what time they have left to honor Optimus Prime, to thank him for helping to save them. It's a very touching moment capped off by the return of Ultra Magnus and Carly, and Magnus finally gets a significant heroic moment where he rallies the rest of the Autobots to fight and lay down their lives in a last stand to honor Optimus Prime's dream of protecting the vulnerable. In issue 6, Optimus and the other Autobots didn't really do anything to prevent Sparky from sacrificing himself, but this time, not only does Optimus stop Spike from meeting the same fate, but the other Autobots step up and face the conflict with their heads held high, rather than being so dependent on Optimus Prime that all they can do is just wait to be stamped out. This is a nice chain of influence moment, and we've been getting more and more of these as of late, where we see other characters coming through for Optimus when he needs them most. Optimus Prime is the ultimate hero, but he's not an island. As much as he inspires others to heroism, he also finds inspiration and strength in others, both the ones that are still living and need his protection, as well as those who he's lost, whose memory Optimus seeks to honor and preserve in his quest for a better world. Both the living and the dead come together to help Optimus Prime beautifully in issue 23. Ultra Magnus and the Autobots charge into battle in one of the most thrilling double splash pages we've seen in the series yet. Their goal is to protect Optimus and give him time to fight off the infection that took hold after wearing Megatron's arm for the bulk of the series. As for the dead, well, Sparky returns this issue, or he returns in a sense, anyway. The other major portion of this issue's story is set in what is presumably a Matrix-induced dream state. Whether it's inside the Matrix or not, doesn't really matter. This Hall of the Primes locale is distinguished from the real world most clearly by Mike Spicer's color palette. And now, I don't really know anything about color, but the colors here seem to reside somewhere between neon and pastel. They seem too energetic and bright to be pastel, but they're not eye-searing enough to be neon. At least, not what I think of when I think of neon. I don't know. But the colors and the screen tone used throughout are very much the same flavor as the colors Spicer has used in the past to distinguish between scenes set on Cybertron and Earth, as well as past and present. Here, these techniques go a long way to giving the vast, sprawling technological labyrinth of the Hall of Primes a surreal, unsettling feel. These colors defy the realism of our world and complement the almost dreamlike structure of this segment, where memories are projected onto the interior of Optimus Prime's windows, and Sparky's mere presence keeps the tendrils of corruption at bay. The specifics of how what is happening in these pages is happening is unimportant, but instead serves as a bit of symbolic storytelling where Optimus overcomes his inner demons with Sparky's help. Optimus is infected by Megatron's arm, yes, but he's also battling against his old self, who it has been hinted at was much more violent and ruthless. The implications and meaning behind both the infection and Optimus Prime's past self have blurred and overlapped throughout this run, which leads to this satisfying conclusion to both aspects, where Sparky, whether real or figment of Prime's imagination, imparts the wisdom that Optimus needs in order to overcome the corruption lurking inside of him. He can't give in to despair. He can't wall himself off from the pain of those he's lost or the difficult decisions he's had to make. He has to feel the pain, regret, and loss because it gives everything meaning, and it's what makes change possible. The title of this video is The Return of Optimus Prime. I chose it not just as a reference to the Generation 1 animated series, but because I believe this is the moment where we fully get Optimus Prime back in the series. I'm not speaking literally because the character has appeared in nearly every issue of the comic. What I'm talking about is how we slowly chipped away at what we expect from Optimus Prime. He was changed very early on, most obviously in a cosmetic sense, when he took up Megatron's arm. I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about it, but Optimus Prime has spent more time in this series with Megatron's arm and fusion cannon than not. And as we would learn eventually, this wasn't just a cosmetic change. I've said before that Johnson spent the first 6 issues building up a pitch-perfect version of Optimus Prime just to begin challenging him and tearing him down in subsequent arcs. It's not that Johnson was deconstructing Optimus, it was more that we saw him teetering on the edge of slipping back into being who he used to be, an old self who presumably compromised his morals in the name of a greater good, first by doing things like half reviving Jetfire because he needed a method of transport, then by leaving Jazz and Cliffjumper behind as prisoners of Shockwave, then later, this threat of slipping back onto the path of ruthless violence became much more literal and horrifying as the infection from Megatron's arm causes him to lose control and lash out in extreme ways. And I'm pretty sure I've used this before, but the arcs leading up to this moment have, in some ways, been a battle for Optimus Prime's soul. A battle that seems to be won by the end of issue 23. In that way, purging the infection marks the return of a more pure Optimus Prime, arguably one closer to how the character was when the series began. It's a return, in a sense, but it's not reverting back to a previous version of the character. It's reorienting him back towards that ultimate hero figure that we know and love, while retaining all the experiences that have changed and shaped him since the shakeup to the status quo. And what was most perhaps impactful about this whole journey was how it was handled within the Matrix and with all of this imagery with Sparky and Spike and Bumblebee and Jetfire and so on. What I love about Johnson's run on Transformers is that sometimes things don't make sense. Bear with me, I'm going somewhere with this, because sometimes things don't need to make sense in stories and not everything has to be explained. Sometimes it just needs to be entertaining or meaningful. And you can achieve both of those things without having an ironclad, ultra-realistic plot. Sometimes you just gotta roll with it. In this case, I think the suspension of disbelief has been rewarding several times over, and issue 23 is no exception. This segment with Sparky was incredibly heartfelt and meaningful, exemplifying the enduring reciprocal circuit between loved ones and the power of that. Plus, as friend of the channel Delta Tryon has pointed out, this is another bit of coming full circle in terms of the art, where we see a return of similar imagery involving Sparky and Optimus. It's not a one-to-one to what we've seen previously, but it ultimately ties in beautifully. And there are, of course, many other wonderful moments in issue 23 of Transformers, though they are ones that I have admittedly much less to say about here. But just to touch on some of them. First, how great is the dynamic between Starscream and Megatron? It channels the spirit of the G1 cartoon quite well, and there's just some absolutely great art by Jorge Corona as Megatron puts Starscream in his place multiple times this issue. It's like kind of comedic, but also just brutal and kind of sad. I don't know, it's good stuff. The Beachcomber bit with Carly is another highlight. I love that the character put himself on the line like this without compromising what he believes is right, which is just more evidence of how much respect Johnson is treating his characters with. A more patronizing writer might have tried to devalue Beachcomber's beliefs by writing him as a hypocrite or taking the easy path of turning him into a straw man or the butt of a joke or something. But here Beachcomber gets a truly heroic moment that is fully on his terms and consistent with who the character is and what he believes. It would be an emotional end for the little guy if we didn't already see him in the preview for issue 25, so the impact is undercut slightly. That is, if we can rely on there not being any trickery regarding the preview for issue 25. Also, another shout out to my buddy Carl from Carl's Collection for pointing out that we've got yet another callback here where we see the flames reflected in Beachcomber's visor, harkening back to the cool transition in issue 17 where the character tells RC what changed him so drastically. And of course, the penultimate issue brings the penultimate body count, which nothing new to add, really, except for some implied deaths in Chicago. Plus, I didn't count the other two carriers from the previous issue, thinking it might be made more explicit in this issue, which it wasn't, but I think we can just assume the Decepticons sunk all three. What the hell, right? Why not? Anyway, there's a lot to love about this issue, I think. I focused on some things more than others and my own interpretation and analysis of what I think is going on here rather than a beat-by-beat breakdown. If you want to hear something more like that, and you want to hear my thoughts on some of the sections that I didn't cover here, check out Teletran Tapes, where we go into depth on the entirety of this issue. That's a monthly podcast with me and the amazing Swizz Prime, Delta Tryon, and Carl from Carl's Collection. And with issue 24 coming up, we're going to be doing a live stream recap and review of that issue. So feel free to check that out on September 10th. More details to follow. But anyway, that's all I've got for this one, so thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Goodbye.